Part 1. The sun poured through the large windows of the Los Angeles County Courthouse, casting its golden light onto the busy hallways. But in the air, there was an unmistakable tension, a tension that had less to do with the clattering of shoes on the marble floors and more to do with the presence of one individual, Olivia Collins. Olivia, a white female police officer, was notorious not only for her skill but for her arrogance. She had managed to avoid consequences for her actions time and time again, hiding behind her badge. But today, things were different. Olivia stood accused of reckless driving, running a red light and nearly striking an elderly pedestrian, Isaac Ward. The incident had not only left Mr. Ward injured, but had also raised troubling questions about Olivia's ethics and professionalism. The case had garnered widespread attention, especially given the judge who would oversee it, Judge Anthony Harris, a respected black man known for his fairness and uncompromising approach to justice. His reputation for making sure everyone, regardless of status, was held accountable, had made the trial even more high-profile. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Journalists, lawyers, and bystanders filled the seats, some hoping to see Olivia face the consequences of her actions, others unsure if her status would allow her to escape yet again. As the door creaked open, all eyes turned to the woman who stepped inside, her presence commanding attention. Olivia entered, her police uniform sharp and pressed. She moved with the confidence of someone who had long been the center of attention. Her platinum blonde hair was styled neatly, and her makeup was impeccable. As her high heels clicked on the marble floor, her eyes scanned the room coldly, dismissing everyone in her path. Her lawyer hurried to keep up, his face tight with stress. He leaned in, whispering, "Olivia, remember, this is serious. Please act professional today." But Olivia just smiled faintly, a mocking curl of her lips, and continued walking to the defendant's table. Her posture screamed arrogance as she sat, crossing her arms over her chest and resting her chin high, as if she were above it all. A few moments later, Judge Anthony Harris entered, tall and composed, with salt and pepper hair and sharp, measured eyes. His very presence exuded authority. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out, and the entire room stood in respect, everyone except Olivia, who remained seated, letting out an audible sigh of defiance. Judge Harris did not address her immediately but gave her a pointed look before settling at the bench. Opening the case file, Olivia's arrogance did not go unnoticed, but Judge Harris, ever composed, chose to ignore it for the moment. The room's tension was palpable, with Olivia's posture of superiority in stark contrast to the calm but firm authority of Judge Harris. Part 2. The trial began, and Judge Harris's voice cut through the tension. "Olivia Collins, you stand before this court accused of reckless driving, failure to obey traffic laws, and nearly causing harm to an elderly man, Isaac Ward, resulting in injuries." Olivia didn't even flinch at the mention of Isaac's name. She adjusted the collar of her uniform lazily, leaning back in her chair, her smirk growing wider. "No need to make a big deal out of it," she said, voice dripping with disdain. "I just hit the gas a little too hard. It happens." The room responded with quiet murmurs of disapproval. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered angrily to one another. Olivia's lawyer, now red-faced, leaned over to her and urged, "Olivia, stop. This isn't the time for jokes." But Olivia was unmoved, her cold gaze fixed firmly on Judge Harris, ignoring the growing discomfort of those around her. Judge Harris set down his pen and raised his eyes to meet hers. His calm face betrayed no emotion, but his gaze was steady, unwavering. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice now firm and commanding, "are you aware of the consequences of your actions?" Olivia laughed again, though it was a hollow sound, one that felt off in the tense courtroom. "The guy's fine. Why are we even here? This is just a waste of time." Judge Harris paused, his eyes narrowing as he carefully weighed his words. "Do you think injuring an elderly man and sending him to the hospital is a trivial matter, Miss Collins?" His voice dropped, and each word seemed to sink deeply into the room. "Do you truly think that what you've done is not a problem?" Olivia's confident mask began to crack. She hesitated before responding, but when she did, her words were still filled with arrogance. It wasn't my fault. If Isaac hadn't been walking so slowly, none of this would have happened. Gasps filled the courtroom. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. A man seated in the back shook his head in disbelief, muttering under his breath, "How can she say that?" Judge Harris's disappointment was clear. He flipped through the case file and slowly, deliberately, read aloud. "According to witnesses, you didn't slow down. You honked aggressively, forcing Mr. Ward to jump out of the way, causing him to fall and injure himself." The room fell silent, and Olivia's posture began to waver. For the first time, she couldn't respond with her usual defiance. Judge Harris continued, his voice steady but stern. "You, as a police officer, should be setting an example. Yet you chose to act recklessly and now refuse to take responsibility. Your privilege doesn't make you above the law." Olivia sat in silence for a moment, her arms tightly crossed, her eyes still attempting to hold her ground. But she couldn't deny the weight of Judge Harris's words. The arrogance that had shielded her for so long was now slipping away, piece by piece. Part 3. Miss Collins. Judge Harris continued, his voice unwavering. "This isn't just about one reckless act. This is about your abuse of power and your failure to be accountable for your actions. You are not above the law." At this, Olivia looked up, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The words from Judge Harris struck a chord deep within her. "Do you think you can evade the consequences of this? What would happen if someone else made the same mistake? Would they be given the same leeway?" Olivia opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she found herself unsure of how to defend herself. Judge Harris's words echoed in her mind, and she realized she had been wrong all along. Her arrogance, her sense of superiority, it was all just a shield, hiding the truth she refused to face. The courtroom went quiet, and Olivia's thoughts swirled in her mind. Then, in a quiet voice, she finally spoke. "I was wrong. I understand now." Judge Harris gave a subtle nod, the first sign of approval in his expression. "It is a start, Miss Collins. But words alone are not enough. It is your actions from here on out that will define you." The trial concluded, and Judge Harris delivered his verdict. "Miss Collins, for your reckless actions, I hereby sentence you to 200 hours of community service at the Los Angeles Veterans Assistance Center. You will work there helping the men and women who have sacrificed so much for our country." Part 4. The sentence was met with mixed reactions in the courtroom. Olivia's jaw tightened as she shot up from her seat, the anger in her eyes flashing. "Community service?" she shouted. "I'm not a criminal. I'm not going to do menial labor." Her lawyer tried to calm her down, but Olivia pushed his hand away, still furious. "You can't make me do this," she spat. Judge Harris remained calm, his expression composed. "If you refuse to comply, you will face harsher consequences, including possible jail time. This is not a suggestion. It's a court order." Olivia's face flushed with rage, but she knew there was no turning back. "Fine," she muttered, her voice trembling, "but I won't pretend I'm sorry." Part 5. The first day at the Veterans Assistance Center was a stark reminder for Olivia of her own shortcomings. She entered reluctantly, wearing the uniform of someone who had been humbled. The center's worn walls and simple furniture were worlds away from her usual lifestyle. It didn't take long for the veterans to notice her, their weary eyes sizing her up. One elderly man named Joe approached her with a warm, yet firm, "Welcome. New here?" he asked. "We don't need your pity, just your respect." Those words hit Olivia harder than any criticism she had ever received before.